Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Kaleidoscope Group's BRG Summit Series. We hope it has been helpful for you, and today concludes our event with our Ask Me Anything session. My name is Barbara Sanner, and I'll be your moderator today. We hope you've enjoyed the on-demand webinar in Part 1 and the interesting and insightful experiences relayed on Tuesday's session in Part 2. Today, we hope you will get interactive with us. We want to know all your questions about BRGs and ERGs, so as they occur to you, please enter them into your GoToWebinar control panel. There's a box there that says enter a question for staff, and click send, and we'll address those as we go along today, as well as other questions that you've already submitted through parts 1 and 2. Now I'd like to introduce Kevin Murphy, consultant for the Kaleidoscope Group, who will be asking your questions to our BRG expert and Senior Vice President, Kelly McMiller of the Kaleidoscope Group. And I'll turn it over to Kelly to get us started.
Thanks, Barb. I'm excited to be here with Barb and Kevin. And we really have a great conversation planned and would like for you to be a part of it. So for those of you just joining us, and for those of you that may have only been able to listen to the recording, we've been doing a 3-part webinar series, as Barb just mentioned. Our first webinar was a pre-recorded webinar where we really talked about the importance of an impactful BRG, which really starts with you as leaders. And also moving from this place of activity to true impact in your organizations. And then in part 2, we featured some of our clients, both in different stages of their employee and business resource group journey. And we had them really talk about their specific stories, what they were observing before they started working with the Kaleidoscope Group, what they hope to change. And we really heard firsthand how they move from A to B. So in both of those cases, we featured Aon and also Munich Re. So we had a B2B and Munich Re, who also has areas within their business and insurance and reinsurance where they are serving both businesses, so ensuring the insured, and then also to the customer. So learned a lot, and we'll continue that learning and continue that dialogue today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to my illustrious partner, Kevin Murphy, who will be the person that will, really send your questions to me, but also we really want to just have an open dialogue as well and explore other areas related to resource groups. So Kevin?
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, very appreciative of everyone on the line today. We have some great participation. Just want to remind everyone, as Barb said initially, please send in your questions. We've done 2 before this, so we're really looking for these real life questions from you to help bring this home. So as Kelly and I are talking, I'll be monitoring the chat. Feel free to send in anything that you have. It could be any question. Kelly and I will come up with it. I promise you that. So the first question, Kelly, that our colleague James brought up, he says, I'm surrounded by other ERG leaders that are not engaged toward an ERG evolution. How can I lead and model for some of my colleagues who might not see the bigger picture, such as that?
All right. Yeah, great question. Now, James, I'm not sure in that question if you're referring to within your particular resource group or across resource group. So I'll answer the question in both respects. I think that you're onto something, if you will, by talking about modeling the behavior. Many times what I find when it comes to change and people in their different styles, that it's a lot easier if they're a part of or have more hands-on experience with the change versus just be told this is how you do it, right? So they can attend this webinar, they can attend their own BRG summit, they can go to trainings, they can hear it verbally, but sometimes they actually have to be involved in it in order to see, oh, okay, this is how we make the connection. So what I'll give you is a couple of examples that hopefully might spur some thoughts. And then also for those that are participating, if you have other ideas that have worked for you, please also chime in. Again, this is hopefully a full dialogue for all of us. So the first example is if you're looking at intra-group, within your group, within your resource group, you might want to leverage your executive sponsor. So there's a couple ways you can do that. Let's say you and the executive sponsor have talked about ways your resource group can be more effective or have greater impact. You could have that conversation and then take the high points and present it to your leadership team. Might be a way to help light a fire underneath them. The other approach might be to think about having have your executive sponsor attend your resource group meeting. And then that way everyone's hearing it firsthand how the group can be more effective or have greater impact. So that is still listening. The other is a more hands-on mode. Let's say one of my clients in particular began to partner with the talent acquisition department to do recruitment. And they were starting to see a greater return because of the involvement of the resource group leader. So how do we expand that with other resource groups? So you might look at where you all are both looking at talent. When I say you all both, I'm thinking of both the Hispanic ERG and the African American ERG, and you collaborate together with talent acquisition where all of your goals are met at the same time. So it'll be more like a win-win-win situation. Talent acquisitions achieves their goal of attracting more diverse workforce, and then both of the resource groups are supporting how you make connections authentically and get that done, whether you're doing early career at a job fair or something like that at a college campus, or speaking and bringing representatives from the business to help them understand what it's like to work in your organization. But sometimes I think people need to be involved in the change before they can actually be motivated. And you are modeling the behavior as a result.
Yep, great call out, Kelly. And what would you say if you're working with other ERG, BRG leaders and looking to and finding that the system as a whole, there may be these pockets of progress and kind of best in class output, but you find that your other colleagues who might be running concurrent ERGs, different ERGs, don't have that same sense of unity across the system. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I think I understand your question. I think it really boils down to effective ways to collaborate. And is this connected to the first question that James asked?
Yes.
Okay. So
yeah.
I think the answer is still very similar in terms of how do I partner with that other resource group where we create a win-win. So, so the example I gave earlier was actually referring to where there is a shared desired outcome, then you can connect with that other ERG and bring them along and participate in the change. The other thing is, and this I think goes across, regardless if we're talking about multiple ERGs or within your ERG. Many times I think people are in a position where they don't know how to be an internal consultant. If you think about it, you are often the only representative people really see as it relates to diversity and inclusion, especially if your organization is, they don't have a robust diversity strategy, but they have resource groups. So the how I approach that person may be through questions. So for example, if I see, Kevin, I don't know if you know this, but I'd like to give you some feedback. I think we could attract more people to the resource group if we did this. Or how might we attract more people collectively? Can we collaborate, look at ways to effectively attract people, because we actually share membership, meaning most people in an organization are part of, all resource groups. So I think effective questioning will help to check people in a respectful way.
Yep. Thanks, Kelly. All right. So our next one's going to come from Brent. So Brent says, Kelly, what is one of the more unique community service activities that you have seen?
Okay. I think I got that. You were a little cut off. So you said that one of the more unique community service activities that I've seen have impact?
Yes.
Okay,
for both the volunteers and the community. Yep.
Gotcha. So I think there's one specific way that this is done well, and that's when the organization selects whether it's the company or the resource group, selects a community event with great exposure. Great exposure. So why am I saying that? So if the organization, and I think one here in Chicago, there is a citywide major, volunteer day, and all companies across the city, even in the suburbs, all volunteer on the same day. They get shirts made. They make a big day out of it. They take buses to the different sites, and people are like volunteering all over the city. There, I think, is a ceremony at the beginning of the day and a ceremony at the end of the day. So sometimes it's a long day. When you have an event like that with exposure, and you're wearing your company t-shirts and branding your organization externally, it can become a talent attraction, right? When they see that much pride and that many people. The other thing it creates is a lot of team building among the ERGs, especially if it's multiple or within the ERG, right? So I would say when you have an event that has exposure, it can actually help you attract talent to the organization. And, people have that meaningful impact. The other piece I think that often gets overlooked is how is it strategically linked to your company's community strategy, if you have one. So with one of my clients, and also when I led the diversity and inclusion at Sara Lee, we spent a lot of time with the community relations person understanding, and this was a CPG company, so self-sufficiency for women was the big community events or connection that made sense. So where your organization can connect to what your company's community strategy is, well, it's like another win-win-win, right? The company wins, the ERG wins, and then also the individual wins for giving back. And it's multifaceted on how the company can win, because now you have all these different groups coming together, moving the needle and creating momentum, and getting the company exposure within the city.
Yeah. I know one that I've seen as well. It's unique in terms of its approach. Is letting the ERG talent really align on what the service project is going to be for that day, right? So getting kind of these straw polls, focus groups, discussion going around what organizations are you a part of in the community, and what would you like to see us at Aon or CDW or Google participate in as we give of our time and talents and energy. I think that creates kind of, like you're saying, Kelly, that top-down kind of pipeline between the lower levels of the organization and the executives, and it just gives everyone the opportunity to feel like the organization is supporting the things that are important to them too.
Yeah, which obviously, and studies have shown it creates more connection. And many of us have read a lot of studies over the last few years. I mean, obviously, we're going to talk about millennials, with you being a part of that group, having that insight is helpful. But we know that millennials are looking for organizations that are out in the community. And so, to your point, if you get to be involved with selecting where we go and what we do, it creates a level of impact. And while you're doing it, it creates a retention tool, but also an attraction tool to your organization. So these are really big and should not be minimized in terms of how the trickle effect of impact can happen.
Yep. And so another question for you from our colleague Karina, Kelly. How are companies driving active engagement for team members? So I think that active piece is important, because you could have people who are engaged, right? Like when something comes up that's of interest to them, but outside of that, they're not engaged. And so how do you create this active engagement, Kelly, is what I'm curious about.
Yeah, it's a great question, and you picked up on probably something that folks on the other end are like, yes, because you often have that 80-20, right? You've got a small set of people doing all the work, and the key is if we can engage more people like you, right, that are on this webinar, all the work wouldn't be on you, number one. So it's a few things I guess I'll start out with in sharing how that happens. Recognition is a huge way to get active engagement. A very tangible example that I have seen done well happened to be from a women's network group. And I think also I remember a multicultural group I was working with also did this. And what they did is the organization actually did not make a big deal if people had a lateral move or even got a promotion. There was no way you really would know that. So the resource group took it upon themselves to recognize their members every time there was a lateral move or a promotion. And I say lateral or promotion because some companies are flat. And so if you can go and get professional development within your resource group and recognition, that is a huge start. So hopefully you're already providing professional development, and hopefully that professional development is linked to how your organization measures performance or measures leadership. So get an understanding of what the leadership competencies are in your organization. If they are not formalized, talk to a leader about it, and talk about it from a futuristic standpoint. What do future leaders really need here? What is the future like of our business, and what would you be looking for? And then make sure your programming around professional development aligns to that. But then at the same time, you also want to look at what can your resource group do aside from what the company is or is not doing. And integration into performance management would be ideal if you can start having conversations with HR leaders, putting that in the performance review if you're part of a resource group, because what it starts to do is create to put resource groups up there in terms of, oh, I can send my employee to this resource group to get leadership development. And it then begins to do a lot of different things. One, you have a pool of leaders. You've gotten leadership and HR involved potentially in recommending potential leaders. So it helps with turnover, succession planning within your resource group. And then also you get the linkage to, I can go here to grow and develop, and I'll be recognized by the company and by my peers or by my constituencies.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. And keep those questions coming, people. We've been getting some questions through the chat, so I appreciate everybody who's interacting. If you have a question, there's never a bad time to ask it. So I have another one here, Kelly. How are BRGs showing kind of this true business impact? So you talked about a little bit ago integrating it into performance management. I think that's a great call out. But any other tips that you would give to our colleague Leslie regarding how BRGs can show this true business impact or demonstrate it to the higher levels of the organization?
Absolutely. So Leslie, hopefully you were able to get access to our pre-recorded webinar where we really gave even more specific examples. And I'll just call out a couple today, and one of my favorite actually. So Frito-Lay some years ago created a jalapeno chip. Most people, that chip itself actually did over, I think, 160 billion in revenue, right? That idea for the chip came from the resource group. So if you are in a B2C business, you want to understand your organization's business strategy, their long-term, how do they plan to grow the market? What markets are more effective strategically for them to make an imprint on? And then you want to really say, how can my resource group support that, right? So that's the how. And then I spoke to the what in terms of an example. If you're sitting there saying, I'm B2B, what can we do, right? Cummins Engine, I think, was another one. Actually, it's from my hometown in Indiana. They actually had some modules, equipment they weren't actually using, and they were throwing this away, right? So it was not necessarily revenue they were trying to generate. They were expanding their resource groups, and their resource groups partnered with regional councils within a particular market. They were coming together to really talk about how can we grow business in a different market, a global market. And the outcome of just having the dialogue between the council in that region and in this case, the Latino resource group, really warranted an idea that came from reconditioning modules they were throwing away. And it saved them money, and actually, as a result, made money too. So they were actually created a revenue generator off of parts they were throwing away, right? And so I can actually, provide more details about this if you look these up. But companies are already creating both the financial impact, they're creating a talent management impact. The war for talent, we've been talking about it in HR for years, is very real. And resource groups are having huge impact in terms of attraction, but also in terms of accessing talent within the organization. So many more mature organizations that have a, I guess you would call it a sophisticated talent management system where we are aware of everyone's talent within the organization. They may already have these tools, but one company in particular knew that if they did not start partnering and understanding the skill set of women across the globe, that they were losing out on talent. They kept going outside to get that talent, and what they really learned is they had a robust talent in the company. But it wasn't until the women's network or resource group actually cataloged the talents and the resumes, and as a result, now they have a global talent pool where all hiring managers can go in and look at this database and actually start to see movement of women across the globe in leadership positions as a result of the creation of this database tool. So they were ahead of HR in this case. So I think understanding what the need is of the organization first, you have to understand the business. You have to operate your resource group like a business. And if you think that way and understand the greatest need, and look at your resource group and how you can support solving that problem, or how you can partner with other resource groups to solve for that.
Yeah. And would you say that it's important to pay attention to the nuance of your organization when setting up your business resource group, Kelly? I know the answer to this one, but I think that's an interesting call out.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And I think, some people may say, well, I don't see the direct connection, right? Maybe your group, you don't see the direct connection, right? So you should, as you're setting up the group, think about what is the unique business case to the organization. And if you haven't done that, then take a step back before you set up any goals, right? And if it's about retention, then that's fine. You focus in on professional development. But you really need to match up and understand how you can solve problems for the business. And it could be a think tank. It could be innovation. It could be one of a brand new resource group called the Green Team. And I am, of course, one of my biases is efficiency. And I really almost get irritated when things aren't efficient, right? So one of the things I love about the Green Team is they're focused on sustainability. They are within one of my clients, Munich Re. But what they've been able to offer to the company is their process and way of thinking has helped all the other resource groups, not to mention the business. So I think they went well beyond just, let's save the earth, let's save water, let's recycle. And they looked at business efficiency as well. And that has been a huge positive, not only for engagement, but also in, business impact.
Yes. Yeah. I got another question here from Melanie. It says, what are some ideas you have, Kelly, on how to get more team members involved in our BRGs when they are busy in their roles?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
That's a tough one, yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's tough all around. I think, I'll point to my other comments earlier around, have you elevated the roles within your resource group enough? So that I think is important. Leveraging leaders to tap on people to be a part of the group versus you going out for the group, going out to tap that talent is another way. Another way I've seen it is when you actually start having conversations with managers. And one company we're working with, they're doing a real talk, which is a workshop about resource groups, because it became evident that it's not an understanding of the value of resource groups in the organization. Once management begins to promote and encourage employees to attend meetings, to get involved, to be in leadership roles, then you start to see better engagement. So you may need to look at two types of strategies. One is what conversations will you have with management and leadership, and what do you want from management and leadership to help encourage more exposures. And that conversation has to be about value. What's the value of resource groups? So we know, but we're the choir. So those conversations need to be had with those that are influencers in the organization. And you're an influencer too. So you need to lead the charge in terms of what that looks like. The other thing I think is we need to put the onus on the employee. A lot of times we don't do that. And I've shared this in a lot of my sessions before, but if I want to go to a resource group event, then I need to talk to my manager about it. If my manager is unaware about resource groups, it's a teaching moment.
Yes.
So let's put some of that onus on the resource group manager or leader themselves to talk to their particular supervisor. And if they don't have the tools, then you as a resource group should be providing that. We should all be telling the same story, right? Here's a value to the organization, here's a business case, and equip them with that. Support them. Here's your speaking points. Send it out. I mean, we can get practical if we need to, but every person understanding the value and being able to articulate it, having that elevator speech, that is growing the diversity and inclusion department. Like, it's growing your resource group, right?
Right. Our friend Christy just had a thought on that. She says, how do you deal with a manager who might be micromanaging your commitment to the ERG? You know, so it's like if you have kind of this resistant manager who may not necessarily see your support of the ERG as valid, even though the ERG is tied back to the business value and the goals. How do you navigate that looking to be a committed ERG member? Thank you, Christy. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great question. I think what she's really getting at is sometimes senior leadership gets it, right? The resource group leaders and D&I office, we get it, but the middle managers don't often understand the value. So Chrissy, two things. I would think about first, who is the messenger that will move that person, right? So what I just described could be you equipping your members to go out and have the conversation about the value. But maybe the reality is, and it's true with many level conscious organizations that many of us have worked in or work in now, I may not be the best person to send the message. Maybe I need to actually leverage my executive sponsor to send that message. Now, obviously, we don't want to create a situation with this middle manager where we're slapping him on the wrist, right? I mean, that could, create more issues than you already have now, right? It's like you went and told on me. But I really would consider who else can send that message, right? So that would be, I think, one of the ways I would address it. The other way is invite that person to the events, to the activities, to the meetings. Because again, if the company's just telling me I need to do this, but if I now see it for myself, and that also disarms people. There's a phrase when I used to work in politics that I would say, invite your enemy to the table to diffuse them. And so he may not be, or she may not be the enemy per se, but one of the ways to help them really understand is, I'd really like to invite you to. Well, you're inviting me? And it changes the dynamic because then they get to see the value. So it's still about value. It's how do you articulate that value?
Yes. Great call out. And thank you, Christy. I think that's a fantastic question. Can you speak, Kelly, to allyship? So how you can utilize other business resource groups, employee resource groups to further the mission of your group? Like, is there an interconnectedness that needs to exist between these groups? Thank you, Jamal. I appreciate the question.
Yeah, that it's a great question. First of all, allies. So let me back up. In the space of diversity and inclusion, there's a topic we often talk about called privilege, right? So one of the best examples that really hit home for me when I first really understood privilege is we talk about this example of two kids that are getting their driver's license. One lives in a more affluent neighborhood. Her parents has 2 cars. Her school provides driver's ed. And then we've got another gentleman, a young man that lives in the city, has to take 2 buses to use his uncle's car to get the drive time to get his points for, you know what I mean, just to get his license. So both have the opportunity to get the driver's license, right? But they have to go through very different things to get there, right? So I share that with you because there is a privilege that the person that lives in a more affluent neighborhood has that they didn't really earn, right? I mean, let's call her Julie. So Julie didn't, go to pick that school or pick to be born from these parents and pick to be born in the U.S. And so you might think, oh, poor guy that, has to do all that. And, Julie's, in bliss, right? She's not even aware that the world has been kind of shaped, if you will, around her, right? She didn't earn that, but it's a privilege. But actually, both of them have privilege. Because if you have the opportunity to be able to see, you have the gift of sight, then you can get a driver's license. Because if you were blind, you couldn't even do that. The reason I talk about that is because when you get to this place in terms of the question is that you need an ally to speak on your behalf. So for me, if I'm talking about Black women issues, I may be heard very different in the organization. So how do you utilize your allies? You need to be sure you almost look at, and this is structurally, a lot of people don't like when I say this, but it could be makes sense for the African American group to get someone that's not African American as their executive sponsor, right? Because if that person that's not African American is going out and advocating for the issues affecting your group, you're going to get a yes way faster. If I go out and I'm African American, then I'm heard as, oh, there she goes again, talking about African American issues. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you really want to look at leveraging your allies to be your voice, right? The one example that Kaleidoscope Group shared with me when I first started working here that really got it is they talked about women voting. So women was out in the street, they couldn't vote years ago, but it wasn't until a man stood up and said, this is ridiculous, that women got the right to vote, right? So we have to understand our privilege and we have to leverage our allies to be our voice. So you can creatively think about the best ways to do that. One of the things I like to leverage is utilizing executives, allies to kick off my events if I'm a resource group leader, inviting other people, sending out specific emails. So I wanted to give you the philosophical, but also a tactical example, because I know sometimes people come to these webinars and they want both. But and you need to have the understanding first, why and how can I leverage the ally, and then start thinking, and what do I want them to do? And then who do you pick? Be strategic about when you pick them, what message you want them to send. You may have to write it, give them speaking points, and don't be afraid to ask, because they're there to help.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a key call out, Kelly. It's like me, so being a member of a young professional ERG, it can so much feel like you want to handle it yourself, right? Like, oh, I can do this, I can get this done. But the main goal is getting it done, Right. So it's like the mission is greater than sometimes the pride that we associate with leading it or being the leader. So I think
that is true.
Yeah. Yep. All right, Julie gave us a chat question here. I'm going to try and read it. It's a little bit of a lengthy one, so bear with me, Kelly.
No problem.
We're a mature colleague resource group from 2011. Everyone is used to providing fun and can't fathom how they will be able to have an effect on the business. What are the steps when one person feels like they see the vision, but they aren't the leader of the ERG BRG? How do we start the discussion to help them see the revised focus or vision and have them feel a part of it? So it's it talks about, looping in this person who may have this vision, but doesn't see the vision that currently exists to a certain extent.
Yeah, a couple thoughts come to mind, and again, invite others to chime in the chat too. I think one of the things that I've seen just very tactically that worked phenomenally with one of our clients is they brought in a panel of local, now they are a national company, but they were having their employee resource group summit or something in the city. And they had, as for our, I think it was our lunch break or something like that, they had brought in representatives from other resource groups in the city and conducted a panel discussion. It was the most powerful. Again, who they selected to give the message created change. Sometimes they're sick of hearing it from you, sick of hearing it from me, but when they see a tangible way that it happens, it's like the light bulb goes on. So to your point, I think what I was hearing in the question is, you may not feel like you're at a level where you can influence the group. So how can you bring other people in to have that dialogue? So if a panel discussion sounds too grand, in the space of diversity and inclusion, there's a lot of collaboration within cities. So maybe you can just connect someone. So let's say the guy's name is Kevin and he's hard-headed. So I might bring in, I might identify someone as in the young professionals groups that's doing great and say, hey, Kevin, I just want to connect you to Jim. Jim is doing some great work. I think we can learn a lot from them. Is there any way that, maybe the two of you can connect, or I can set up lunch? So maybe it doesn't have to be this grand, lengthy affair, an event, but again, the messenger, you're selecting the messenger to be able to make sure the message is heard.
Is there anything that you can speak to, Kelly, where organizations have used BRGs as a talent pipeline to leadership positions? Mm-hmm. And is there an importance to create a pipeline from BRGs to leadership positions?
Yeah, I mean, it's very connected with what I said earlier. Yep. But yes, companies are doing it. I'll be completely honest with you. The majority of clients that are calling us lately are not necessarily sophisticated in that way, and that's probably why they're calling us. The companies that have it kind of together have already created the level of recognition. So on a very tactical, matter, the steps or how that has been done is it starts with the partnership with the HR, and I feel like I'm a broken record in that space. Right. It's really aligning the program. So if your group is out continuously, and I'm not dogging this out, but continuously are only doing food, folks, and fun events and not making a connection to professional development or skill development that the company is looking for talent to have, then you'll likely not be looked at as a talent development resource, right? Right. So how do you start to make that shift? And it starts with, well, what are you putting out there? So at one point, when I was leading this space in corporate America, what we did is Six Sigma was a big deal. So we started looking at what are the objectives of this Six Sigma initiative. They call it continuous improvement. And then we aligned, said, well, we can provide that. We can bring our speaker in connected to that. So you want to hang your hat in the development space on what the company's trying to do. Okay, or a specific skill that they're trying to develop. And you will not only get members from your group or constituency, but you'll get them from all over the company. If you send out an email and you're telling me you have an hour session or a speaker that's going to help me better my career within the job I'm in right now, I'm there.
Yes. Yes, 100%. Great response, Kelly. Appreciate you kind of fledging that one out. Can you speak to the competencies of an effective BRG leader? So I know that we've talked about people at certain levels of the organization, certain roles, but anything that comes up to you in terms of what makes an effective BRG leader. I know that we talked about this, but
no worries.
Get back into it with our colleagues. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, not everybody was able to attend all the sessions, but I think we have a BRG development journey. I'm going to speak specifically to probably 3 specific skills within that journey. The first is advanced cultural competence. So you have almost a spotlight, right, or a magnifying glass put on you when you become a resource group leader. And people are looking to you to see what it looks like to model inclusion. So there is this level of advanced cultural competence. So it's not just enough to know, right, I shouldn't call people, certain things, right? I mean, that's the basics. Advanced cultural competence almost gets you to a place where you can even nicely and respectfully coach others. And I'm not trying to send a message that, if you're not qualified, that you go out and coach. But what I can tell you is if I'm part of the young professionals group, I do understand the data and the information and issues affecting millennials, for example. And I can speak intelligently to that. And that helps provide strategy and guidance, right, to the organization. So one, you've got to live it, right? The second element is influencing. So if you are afraid of your own shadow, right, you're not going to be able to navigate or influence the organization. So it's a muscle, right? I also think that you can practice it along with strategic thinking. Many people think it's like, oh, you're born with it, right? Either you're a leader or you're not, you're strategic or you're not. And I disagree. I think that there are things that you can do that make you more strategic, right? And so one of those things is as you develop your goals and objectives, as you have conversation, as you prep for conversations with leaders, your executive sponsor, you need to be thinking about the why, right? So strategic thinking, influencing, and really basically start living and acting like an executive, okay? So, I mean, when you are a leader, we'll just say a leader, right? So my boss always talks about you will be sent to who you sound like. You will be sent to who you sound like. So if you sound like you're, working at this level, that's who you'll be talking to. When you start asking questions that are at this level, right, then, oh, you know what? Well, let me take you to our VP of Talent Management. I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. So there is this basic leadership skills, but specifically, I think is strategic perspective, influencing, advanced cultural competence. And then the last thing is around relationships. You need to be able to build relationships both internally and externally. And that strategic perspective will allow you to better understand which relationships do you need to invest in more based upon the needs of your constituency and the needs of the organization that you serve, right? Now you're thinking like a business resource group. So hopefully that was helpful.
Yes, no, I thought that was a great explanation. I'm smiling. I got one here that I like for you, Kelly. Can you speak to this idea of intersectionality around young people in business resource groups, millennials, and how that's affecting kind of the overall trajectory of business resource groups? And I'm sure I got some thoughts on that one too.
I was going to say, I'll start.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
So was it Brian, he said?
Brian.
Brian, you were like reading our minds. We had talked about just before the call started, what are some of the cutting edge things that are happening in resource groups? And so I want to tie this in as I answer your question. So about a year ago, sometime last year, I think it was Deloitte. Deloitte put out an article, and the article said, we want to eliminate all resource groups. And so I had clients calling me panicking. What does this mean? Let's talk about this. Even internally, we were all talking about it. And so two things are happening around that. So the trajectory of resource groups are being challenged. I think Deloitte's decision to do that may have been based on how their organization is structured. Another company may really, really need to do that to help create connections, right? So just to address that component of the article, if you will. But the other thing that's facing groups is the millennial population does not necessarily want to be boxed in. So the notion of, to your point, intersectionality is based upon identity. So I may be, a Gen X, right? A female and an African-American from the Midwest, right? And so how I lead with which identity may determine who I associate with, right? And the way my generation or generations before me may have thought about that is very different. So I have resource group leaders call me and say, we can't attract, the millennial population, right? Or you have an African-American that's, kind of same background potentially as me, but, 10, 15 years younger. And she's saying, I'd rather be part of the young professionals group. And so we have to ask why, right? So two things I'll say, and then I'll kind of let Kevin chime in here, is we need to look at the diversity within the diversity of our constituency. We cannot be operating and playing the old tape, or we are going to see the bottom fall out and not have sustainable groups. But if you think about this just from a business perspective, these are your customers, right? These are your customers for your resource group. What do they need? Have you asked them? Have you categorized them? Have you provided programming connected to what they need? So if you are putting out programming and information development that's connected to the needs of your current population, not the population from yesteryear, then you will attract them, right? So Kevin, definitely please chime in on your thoughts around this. This is a dynamic discussion.
No, I think that's spot on. And just a little context for our colleagues on the webinar, I run a millennial professional think tank. So a diverse millennial professional think tank where we then give the insights to corporations, small companies around what do millennials want and what do their young people want. So this is just one of those pressing topics nowadays around millennials aren't joining BRGs, ERGs with the fervor of their generational predecessors. So it's really about, like Kelly said, can you speak to my perspective being a millennial Black man, a millennial Latina woman? Are you talking about things that are really pertinent to my reality, or is there a generational kind of intersectionality that exists even in their own business resource group? And so if this doesn't necessarily feel like it resonates with me in my current situation, then I'm just going to devote my time to a community organization or a nonprofit or something that is closely aligned to who I am and what's important to me. So it's like if the ERG isn't really hitting the mark in terms of driving that intrinsic value that makes these people feel engaged and like it's talking about things in a way that resonates with them, then there's nowadays especially plenty of other opportunities to get involved with kind of these affinity groups. So I have a friend, Fabian Elliott, who I've known for years, and he runs an organization called Black Tech Mecca, and it's an intersection of African Americans, Black people, and who work in the tech industry. And so that's the type of place that somebody will go and say, I would like to support this as a Black person in tech versus my business resource group, etc. So that's kind of how I see it nowadays, Kelly, show up to a certain extent, and kind of what I think a lot of the sentiments of this population are. Oh, there we have our lovely colleague Melanie as well to elaborate. There we go.
Yeah, I wanted to introduce you all if you haven't already met Melanie. So Melanie also is one of the millennials in our on our staff, and also does a lot of work with what I would call kind of external resource groups. So I'll have her chime in because I think this is a very, very relevant conversation. Thank you again for the question.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I heard millennials and ran over. Really great conversation thus far. One thing that comes to mind, I was chatting with Kelly and Kevin about this, is just group dynamics in general. And so how we can prepare BRG leaders, because a lot of questions we get externally are, well, millennials don't want to join BRGs, or if they do, they want to join the millennial group. And so how do we get them intertwined with some of these other groups? And that was one thing, the intersectionality piece is key, because there's a lot of millennials that have those intersectionalities, but also going into these BRGs or ERGs, some of the leaders, because of tenure and time with the organization, they end up being the leaders of the organization. And so really aligning the ERG on what impact means to them. And so some ERG leaders, because they are coming from a different generation, impact to them is awareness. So, the flag and fun, and really showing the organization that we know when Black History Month is, or, or the Hispanic Heritage Month. And so we want to be out there, but also the millennials or the younger people of the generation, their impact is true impact. So in the community externally, what are we doing out there? And then also internally, some of those great examples of coming out with new products or marketplaces that really speaks to millennials. They want to hear the bigger purpose, the bigger vision of what this looks like. And so having, as D&I leaders, having that in mind, going into these BRGs and really equipping the leaders to say, hey, let's take a pause. Do we have the right people in leadership? Are we also keeping in mind of these other impactful areas? And so there's one thing. And then the other thing, just really having a keen eye to like what millennials want. And so one cool thing I heard recently from one of my tech cohort folks was that they actually, so they had a millennial ERG, but they wanted to merge with the Latino ERG to do something. And so they actually, one thing that's starting to phase out and something I loved as a kid, but Bring Your Child to Work Day is not a reality for millennials. We're not having children as early as some of our coworkers. And so that was something that the millennials felt left out. They're like, I don't have a kid. I don't want to, be participating in this. They actually had a joint venture where they had like, it was more so family day. And they invited the millennials' parents to the workplace. And so this was really impactful because the millennials felt like they're connected to their parents as the 27-year-olds, maybe 10, 20 years ago, are connected to their children. And so they were able to have family day where the millennials brought their parents, and that really spoke to Latino ERG because they're so family oriented. And so it really was a hit within the organization.
Yeah, I do have to say, I am happy to not take part in Take Your Child to Work Day at this present moment. I'm all right with it, y'all. No, but I think that's a great point from my perspective, Melanie. I think the kind of this intersection between the primary dimension of the affinity group and age is like a very crucial kind of meeting point for the success of your BRG ERG, right? Because it's like Kelly and I were talking about this and Melanie earlier. I feel there's these multiple different experiences that are kind of brought together as one ERG. So like an African American male, Kelly always tells the story about her son Isaiah all the time, how they see the world. But it's like an African American male growing up today may see the world differently and probably will based on how they grew up from an African American baby boomer. And so you want to speak to that a little bit, Kelly, kind of your thoughts on that whole component?
I think just to share a little bit more around the story, I always talk about the fact that there's not one Black experience, right? And so you can take this example, but you can look at any dimension, any resource group, and look at the diversity within the diversity, which is what we're talking about. And it gets overlooked. And that's why you're not engaging or able to engage. I think it was Melanie that shared, a Hispanic guy got hired. And he's like, I tell you what, I know that, I may speak a different language, whatever he was referring to it specifically. He said, but I don't want to be a part of the Hispanic ERG. And everybody had a shock, right? So we have to really understand what that is, right? So I always say, one, there's not one Black experience. So my father, my stepfather, he does not like to be called African American. He's like, I'm Black. Right? Where I may say, yeah, it's cool, Black, African American, whichever. So we just really have to understand that. And then when I even talk to my son, who's now will be 21, even the choice of words, I said he was going to a predominantly white school. And I asked him in high school, does race ever come up? And he says, what do you mean? And I'm like, race. And he says, you mean culture? So he broke it down, or him and his friends discussed it based on culture. Did you come up in a military family? What foods do you eat? I mean, it was a very different conversation and different labeling. So if we just take just those small examples, I'm sure you guys have a ton. And how you're communicating now isn't resonating. It isn't resonating. And so the best thing, and this is what I think we've all been taught, but you need to ask, if you're making decisions about that impact millennials, and millennials are not in the room, get them in the room, right? So who are you trying to attract? If you're trying to attract people that are not currently part of your membership, have focus groups, right? Ask them, why aren't you coming? What programming would attract you? So we need to understand that. If you treat the resource group like a business, everything should change. You all have the skill sets now. I know you do. You're operating every day in your business right now, in your organization like that. Apply them to this resource group and you will create impact.
Yes. Yeah. Do you still got Melanie with you, Kel, or is she?
I do. She's hanging on.
So Melanie, while we have you for another minute, when you're looking at these kind of external resource groups, do you guys connect with ERGs at organizations a lot? Like, are there partnerships between those two? Like, are most of the ERGs that you're seeing through ASE or Prosponica that you might be working with corporate? Or is there a large kind of appetite for people to work with these external associations for their ERG?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting because a lot of these organizations, they formed because there weren't internal opportunities or resources for them. Now the ERGs have really blown up, especially it's kind of, I'm in both lanes. So I'm on the D&I side where I'm seeing organizations want to invest more internally than spend $5,000-$10,000 with a Prospanica or an ASE. But
Yes.
really, you need to have a mix of the two, because organizations, like as being a leader in a couple organizations externally, the appetite is still very large for external like resources. And so both of my organizations, I'm involved with ASE, which is the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement, as well as Prospanica, which was formerly NSHIMBA, National Society of Hispanic MBAs. We do a lot with ERGs and equipping ERGs. And so while it is really important for companies to invest internally, externally, they're still coming to our organization saying, like, we want more development. We want to be able to learn best practices from other ERG leaders as well. And so they're able to do that externally, where internally there's not really too much going on as far as other companies and finding out best practices and stuff like that.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Yep. Back to you, Cal.
Well, I think we are pretty much at our time, unless there's some additional questions. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank each of you for submitting questions personally. We've really enjoyed this. We would like to do more of this type of webinar, and also make sure maybe we even ask you to be a guest in a future webinar. So if there is interest for additional questions, please send them our way. We will definitely make contact with you to try to better understand your needs, and let's just continue the dialogue. So Kevin, I'll have you kind of make your parting remarks, and we'll sign off.
Yeah. Once again, just appreciate the conversations. Appreciate our client organizations who have been able to join us. So following up on this webinar, you'll be getting a series of emails from us. And those will allow you to actually go ahead and book an appointment with me, and I will in turn connect you with Kelly. Kelly's up in the mountains somewhere, a house in the hills, so I'll make sure that no, I'm just kidding. But we really want to help you to understand how this shows up in your organization. So the conversation is good, and the case examples are great, but I think thinking about it like Kelly was talking about earlier at a nuanced level, and how your specific ERG or your system of ERGs that you manage can benefit the overall business, and how you can begin to track metrics that lead up to the overall business health and what you all do for a living. So it's definitely something that we are more than happy to support you in. And so I want to thank everybody for kind of coming out today. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, shockingly, so we can go ahead and close this out here. So I'll pass it over to Barb, who can go ahead and close us out on the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you both. This was a great interactive session, and yes, thank you everyone for joining us and for sending all of your questions in. If we didn't get to your question today, we will definitely follow up with you via email to make sure that we address everything that has been asked. Thank you all again, and have a great day.
Take care.